Peter had led the disciples with him in disobedience from where Jesus had told them to wait. So this looks like another massive failure. How will Jesus respond to Peter? Will he cut him loose? Will he say, first you denied me, you're always sticking your foot in the mouth, what's up with jumping out of boats? And then this. Peter jumps in the lake again. Welcome back to Bible Study Hub. I'm Ann Wiggins. Peter's always jumping in a body of water. It'll be great to watch him do it again today. I will be reading from the Legacy Standard Bible as always as we jump into John chapter 21. It's the last chapter in the Gospel of John. And I'm going to say this every day this week in case people are just tuning in. We will go through Friday this week, and then I'm taking an indefinite break to just get my brain put back together and rest a little bit because I'm just really, really tired. So we'll take a little break, but don't worry, we'll be back eventually. So here we go. Peter's going to jump in the lake again, and we will be reading from John chapter 21, verses 4 to 11. And here's what it says. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and cast himself into the sea. But the other disciples, I'm going to interject, who were sane, came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 200 cubits away, dragging the net full of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place and fish placed on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have now caught." Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Well, yesterday we talked about how Peter led some of the other disciples to walk away from ministry life and go back to their old secular lives. Fishing wasn't a hobby at this time, it was a career. And Peter likely felt pretty demolished by his epic failures in Jesus's greatest moment of need. So it appears as though he decided he was done, washed up, done as a disciple, not worthy. He was going to just quietly go back to the lake and the boats and the nets and just do something he knew he was really good at, fishing. Let's take a minute to understand what Peter and the others involved decided to go back to. This was labor-intensive work, not a hobby. Fishing was physically grueling. They used these large, heavy nets made of linen or flax. They required constant maintenance with mending the tears and cleaning and drying them. They would cast their nets from the boat or the shore at night when the fish were more active near the surface. And then dragging nets full of fish was backbreaking work, and long hours were spent out on the water. What boats and equipment were like at this time were, as you can imagine, just small little wooden vessels, usually rowed. Maybe if they were big, they might have a single sail on the mast. They were designed for just a small crew, 4, 6, 8 men, something like that. And as I said, they would have to fish often at night because the daytime heat would drive the fish down. So I know what this feels like because I work at night quite often, and maybe some of you have too, but it's exhausting. And you have to do shifts, and sometimes you're trying to get naps during the day. And then during the day, they also have to repair their nets and sell the fish. And so these men were not escaping to an easy job. This was really physically taxing, very difficult. So you might think, well, why would they do that? It seems like ministry was actually maybe in some ways a little easier than this. Well, I think it was more of a mental thing. Peter, as I said, felt like a failure, but he knew what he was not a failure at: fishing. He failed as a disciple, but he will not fail as a fisherman. He knows he can do it. And so off they go. And it probably felt a little bit like riding a bike. The sights, the smells, the sounds, the waves, the nets. They've all been here before. They've all done this before. And so as they get out a little way from the shore, they cast their nets over and drag for a few minutes. They pull it up expecting to see fish, except there's no fish. Don't you see how Jesus made sure that they were not successful at what they just knew that they could do? Well, about that time, Jesus appears on the shore. They don't recognize him. He calls out and says, "Do you have any fish?" Did you notice that he calls them children? Sometimes rabbis address their followers with this term of endearment, and it feels and looks like Jesus is just doing some resetting of some things here. They've decided to leave discipleship, but their rabbi comes back and calls them back to it. Well, after Jesus told them to move the nets to the other side of the boat, suddenly the Sea of Galilee gives up every fish in it, and they barely have the strength to even pull them in. All of a sudden, they recognize him, and John informs everyone, "Hey, that's the Lord." I absolutely love Peter's response. He just jumps right in the water. What is up with Peter and jumping out of a boat? You know, he jumped out of a boat and walked on the water prior. You know, people like this, right? They're just kind of brash. They don't really think about like the ramifications of their choices. Night is freezing, and the water obviously only makes you colder, but Peter just can't get to Jesus fast enough. The rest, they're sane. They stay in the boat. They row it to shore. And John tells us some very specific eyewitness pieces of information. The first is that the net contained exactly 153 fish. They counted them, which I love. They had probably never had a catch like that in their lives. You know, now you see people, they measure the fish and they post it on social. Well, they probably didn't have a measuring tape with them, but they could count how many, and no doubt they posted that on their Facebook pages. And then John, who made sure that we knew he was a faster runner than Peter, he gives Peter a little kudos in this passage. It says in verse 11 that Peter is the one who dragged the net full of fish in. Now just realize these nets, as I said before, were heavy to begin with. And all those large fish could easily have been at least 300 pounds. Peter dragged all that in by himself. You know, he probably lost the race with John because he was too muscular to run really fast. Well, we'll stop with that today because I'm running out of time here. But tomorrow we'll pick up the story where Peter actually has now to face Jesus. Peter had led the disciples with him in disobedience from where Jesus had told them to wait. So this looks like another massive failure. How will Jesus respond to Peter? Will he cut him loose? Will he say, "First you denied me, you're always sticking your foot in the mouth, what's up with jumping out of boats? And then this, you led my followers to follow you instead of me? What is wrong with you?" Is that what he'll say? Or will he have a much, much better approach and one that will draw Peter back in? You probably know the answer already, but we'll cover that starting tomorrow. Thank you for being with me here on Bible Study Hub. Lord willing, we'll see you back here at 6 a.m. Eastern Time as we go live with our videos. Help you get off to a great start by just focusing on the Lord and spending some time in His Word. Until tomorrow, have a great day, and I'll see you back here then.